Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The content is intended for entertainment purposes only and may contain themes of horror, the supernatural, and psychological tension. Listener discretion is advised. This story is not suitable for young children or sensitive audiences. The town of Windale had a strange silence to it. Tucked between thick woods and steep hills, it looked like the kind of place where nothing ever happened, and where nothing ever should. For Emily Carter, the move from bustling Chicago to this forgotten corner of the map felt like exile. Her parents called it a fresh start. She called it a punishment. Emily's first day at Windale High was ordinary until lunchtime. That's when she noticed the stares. Not just the usual new girl glances. These were nervous, whispered looks, as if she brought something dangerous with her. She sat alone under a tree trying to read when a girl approached her. She was pale, with short dark hair and a nervous twitch in her fingers. "Hey," the girl said quietly. "You're new, right?" "Yeah," Emily replied. The girl leaned in, glancing around before whispering, "Just don't say the name out loud." "Okay." Emily blinked. "What name?" The girl's eyes widened. She backed away without another word and disappeared into the building. That night, Emily tried to shake off the strange encounter. Her bedroom was still half unpacked, with boxes piled high and posters leaning against the walls. As she was taping one up above her bed, she noticed something scratched into the paint, almost invisible under the light. She leaned closer and read the words carved into the wood, "Don't say her name out loud." A chill ran down her spine. She ran her fingers across the carving. It looked old, faded, like it had been there for years. And yet, how had she missed it earlier? Emily told herself it was just a coincidence. Kids in small towns had weird traditions, right? Maybe it was a local ghost story meant to scare newcomers. Still, something about the message and that girl's terrified eyes stayed with her. The next morning at school, Emily tried to talk to the girl again, but no one seemed to know who she was talking about. "Short hair, pale, sat near the library yesterday?" she asked a few students. They just shook their heads. In her second period history class, they were studying local folklore. Emily perked up, wondering if she might hear something useful. Mr. Grayson, the teacher, was discussing the town's founding and briefly mentioned a fire that destroyed the old church in the 1800s. "Windale has its share of ghost stories," he said with a chuckle, "but don't let them scare you. Most are just rumors." Emily raised her hand. "What about the one where you're not supposed to say a name out loud?" The classroom fell silent. Mr. Grayson stared at her for a moment, then forced a smile. "Best not to dwell on superstition. Let's focus on the facts, shall we?" The rest of the day was a blur. People avoided her. Some whispered as she passed. It was like she had already broken some unspoken rule. When she returned home that evening, the house felt colder. She closed her bedroom door and stared at the carved warning again. "Don't say her name out loud." Whose name? Why was everyone so afraid? She couldn't help herself. She opened her laptop and typed in Windale cursed name into the search bar. Most links were old, dead, or irrelevant. But one link led to a forum post over a decade old. The title read, "Do not say Lorana's name aloud." She listens. Emily felt a jolt. Lorana? Was that the name? The page contained a mix of ramblings, blurry images, and broken links, but one part stood out. It's not just a story. It's a trap. The moment you say her name out loud, she knows you exist. That's how she finds you. Suddenly, the air in the room seemed heavier. A soft thud echoed from her closet even though it was empty. Her heart raced. Emily closed the laptop, breathing hard. She hadn't said the name, not yet. But now she knew it. And something deep in her gut told her that knowledge alone might be enough to wake it up. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the name, Lorana. It echoed in her thoughts like a song she didn't want to remember but couldn't forget. She hadn't said it out loud yet, but the idea pressed down on her like a weight. Every time she passed a mirror or turned off the lights, she felt watched. The next few days at school were worse. Whispers followed her down the halls. Students she hadn't even spoken to avoided eye contact. Even teachers seemed tense when she was around. It was like the moment she learned the name, something had changed, something invisible but powerful. One afternoon, Emily went to the school library hoping to find answers. She didn't expect much. The library was small and dusty, filled with outdated encyclopedias and old yearbooks. But in the farthest corner, behind a stack of forgotten history texts, she found a leather-bound book without a title. Its spine was cracked, and the pages smelled like mold and fire. She opened it gently. It was a handwritten journal. The ink had faded, but someone had tried to preserve it. Names, dates, and descriptions of strange events filled the pages. People who had vanished, crops that withered overnight, livestock found mutilated. And then, at the bottom of one page, a line caught her breath. The evil returned when the name was spoken aloud. Lorana walks again. Emily stared at the name. There it was, written in shaky, frantic handwriting. She read the line again and again, absorbing every detail. She whispered it under her breath. Lorana came out soft, barely audible. But as soon as the name left her lips, she felt it. The light above her flickered. Once, twice, then held steady. She closed the book quickly and shoved it back onto the shelf. Probably just old wiring, she mumbled. But her hands were trembling. At home, everything was quiet at first. Her parents were downstairs, watching TV. Her little brother was asleep. Emily went to her room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of her bed. She kept thinking about the flickering lights, the carved warning, and the stories in that journal. She reached for her phone to text Jordan, the only classmate who had even looked at her kindly that week. But just as she unlocked the screen, the lights in her room went out. Pitch black. Then came a low creaking noise, like someone slowly opening a door. Hello, she called out. No answer. She reached for the light switch. Nothing. Suddenly, her phone lit up on its own. The screen flickered. It wasn't the home screen anymore, it was the note app. A message was already typed in. You said my name. Her heart stopped. She dropped the phone, and it clattered to the floor. The message remained on screen. She scrambled to turn on the bedside lamp. It flicked on after a few tries, casting a dim yellow glow over the room. Her mirror across the room fogged up, even though the air was cold. And then, slowly, letters began to form in the condensation. You called me, Emily screamed. Her parents ran upstairs seconds later, worried, but when they opened the door, the mirror was clean. The phone was blank. The lights were back to normal. She couldn't explain it. They thought she had a nightmare. Maybe she had. But Emily knew what she saw and what she felt. Saying the name wasn't harmless. It wasn't just a word. It had power. That night, she lay awake for hours, every muscle tense, staring at her door. The shadows seemed thicker than usual, and every creak of the house made her flinch. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought she heard breathing just outside her door. She had said the name, and now something knew she was here. By morning, Emily hadn't slept a minute. She stared at the rising sunlight like it was a lifeline. The strange message on her phone, the writing in the mirror, none of it was there now. But she remembered every second of it, and the fear in her chest still hadn't faded. At school, things got even stranger. During her biology class, she glanced up at the window and saw a figure standing across the courtyard, still and pale, watching her. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. No one else had seen it. She asked Jordan if he'd seen anyone outside. He shook his head, looking concerned. You okay? You look like you haven't slept. I said it, Emily whispered. The name. Just once. Quietly. And now things are happening. Jordan froze. His eyes narrowed, his voice dropped low. You said it. Emily nodded. Then you need to be careful, he said. Once she knows you, she doesn't forget. That day, Emily felt like she was drifting between two realities. In the classroom, everything looked normal, but she kept catching glimpses of things out of place, shadows that moved without a source, reflections that lagged behind her real movements, and faint whispering no one else seemed to hear. That night, as she brushed her teeth, she looked into the mirror and froze. For a moment, her reflection didn't copy her movements. She turned her head left, but the image stared straight ahead. Her heart jumped into her throat. Then the reflection smiled. Emily dropped the toothbrush and stumbled back, crashing into the bathroom door. When she looked again, everything was normal. Her reflection moved as it should, her face pale, terrified. She ran back to her room and locked the door. But the nightmare wasn't over. At 2:43 a.m., Emily jolted awake to a sound, a soft whispering, like someone was speaking just beside her bed. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakably intimate, like something breathing the words into her ear. She turned on the light. Nothing there. She checked under the bed. Opened the closet. Empty. But then she saw it. On her wall, where the warning had been carved before, there were now 3 new words scratched into the paint. I'm getting closer. The letters looked fresh. Red. Blood? Her hands shook as she touched the letters. It was still wet. She backed away and picked up her phone to call someone, anyone, but her screen wouldn't turn on. Just a static screen glowing with a soft red light. Suddenly, a low hum filled the room like a faint vibration deep in her chest. Her breath caught as her closet door creaked open an inch, just an inch. Then it stopped. The air felt thick, charged with static like before a lightning strike. Emily pressed her back to the wall, not daring to move, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear. After minutes of silence, she worked up the courage to inch forward and slam the closet door shut, locking it. She turned to her mirror again, and there, faint, almost invisible, was a shape in the reflection behind her. A tall woman with long black hair and a hollow, eyeless face. Emily spun around. No one was there. But when she looked back, the figure was gone from the reflection too. The rest of the night, she sat in her bed, knees pulled to her chest, holding a flashlight like it could save her. She had awakened something. A presence that was no longer just watching. It was here. It was coming. And every time she closed her eyes, she could almost hear it whispering her name. Emily knew she couldn't survive this alone. The next day, she found Jordan in the school library during lunch. He was sitting at the back, headphones in, flipping through a thick history book. She didn't waste time. I need to know everything, she said, her voice trembling. About Lorana. Jordan looked up slowly. His expression darkened. You really did say it, he murmured, removing his headphones. Did anything happen? Emily hesitated, then nodded. She's here. I don't know how to explain it. She's in my mirrors, my phone, my room. Last night she almost came out of the closet. Jordan looked around, then motioned for her to sit. He leaned in close and lowered his voice. My grandmother told me stories when I was little. I thought they were just old village tales, you know? But I remember them all. She used to say Lorana was burned alive here. Right where Windale stands now. Emily swallowed hard. Jordan continued. Over 100 years ago, she lived in a nearby forest. People called her a witch. They said she could curse your crops just by walking near them, or make your baby sick just by looking at it. Of course, most of it was fear and superstition. She was just different. Quiet. Strange. What happened to her? They dragged her from her home one night, tied her to a stake near the old church and set her on fire. But before she died, she screamed a curse at the crowd, if you dare speak my name, I will return with fire in my breath and rot in my hands. Emily's skin prickled. That's when the town changed, Jordan said. Buildings burned down without reason. Children disappeared. Crops failed. And the survivors made a pact, never speak her name again. But that was so long ago, Emily said. Why is it still happening? Because it never stopped, Jordan replied. Every 20 or 30 years someone breaks the silence. Says her name. And then the cycle begins again. He looked directly into Emily's eyes. And this time, it's you. The weight of it hit her like a stone. This wasn't just a ghost story or a hallucination. It was a legacy of fear passed down through generations, and she was now a part of it. Has anyone ever stopped her? She asked. Jordan shook his head. Some tried. Most disappeared. There's talk of a ritual, something to bind her. But no one knows the full details. Then we need to find it, Emily said. Before she does more than just whisper. Jordan nodded reluctantly. There's one place we could look. The church ruins. They never rebuilt it after the fire. People say the answers are buried there. Let's go. That night, armed with flashlights and layered jackets, they snuck out and headed toward the woods at the edge of town. The path to the ruins was overgrown and cold, the air thick with moisture and silence. Owls hooted in the distance, and the trees loomed like sentinels watching their every step. Eventually, they reached a clearing. At its center were the blackened remains of stone pillars and scattered charred wood, the bones of the old church. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It felt wrong, like the air itself was trying to push them away. But they pressed on. Inside the collapsed remains, under a broken altar stone, they found a rusted metal box. Inside it was a leather-bound journal, yellowed with age. Jordan flipped through it. This belonged to the priest, he whispered. The one who gave the order to burn her. They scanned the pages. Most were filled with ramblings and guilt. But near the end was a ritual, written in Latin, partially translated. To silence the mouth that curses, bind the soul in ashes, blood of the caller, fire of the fallen. Emily frowned. It's incomplete. Maybe there's more, Jordan said. We'll keep looking. But as they stood, a sudden gust of wind swept through the ruins, extinguishing their flashlights. And in the darkness, a voice hissed, I warned you not to speak my name. The voice froze them in place. Emily and Jordan stood back to back in the pitch-black ruins of the old church, breath shallow, ears straining. The flashlight flickers were gone now, replaced by a bone-deep chill that gripped the air. Then came the footsteps. Slow. Dragging. crunching through the dead leaves and cracked stones. Emily gripped Jordan's arm. "We have to go. Now." They sprinted through the forest path, barely dodging low-hanging branches and tangled roots. Behind them, the footsteps didn't chase, but the oppressive presence followed, thick like smoke in their lungs. When Emily finally made it home, her clothes were damp with sweat and dew. She didn't even say goodnight to her parents. She locked her bedroom door, closed every curtain, unplugged the mirror. But the fear followed her inside. That night, the whispers started again, louder now. Not from under the bed or behind the closet, but inside her head. A voice that pulsed with every heartbeat. "You called me. You cannot uncall me." Emily clamped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The voice was already inside. It knew her thoughts, her fears, her memories. It began to show her visions, flashes of burning wood, screaming villagers, a woman in tattered robes standing in the fire, her face untouched by the flames. Lorana. In one vision, Emily stood in the town square surrounded by people with hollow eyes chanting her name. In another, she watched herself carve Lorana's name into her own arm using a shard of glass, while smiling. She screamed herself awake. But the nightmare hadn't ended. Across her ceiling, in what looked like scorched writing, were the words, "You are becoming mine." She couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thick with rot, like something had died inside her walls. She stumbled to the door, yanked it open, and ran to her parents' room. But they weren't there. The bed was untouched. No sign of them anywhere. She searched the entire house, silent. Lifeless. Even the clocks had stopped ticking. Only her reflection remained, watching from every screen and glass surface, smiling with too many teeth. When her phone buzzed suddenly, she jumped. It was a message from Jordan. "Meet me at the hill near the graveyard. I found something." Emily didn't hesitate. She threw on a hoodie and ran through the empty streets. No cars. No dogs barking. Not even the wind. It was like the entire town was holding its breath. She met Jordan under the skeletal branches of a twisted oak. He looked shaken, eyes wide, hair unkempt, like he hadn't slept in days. "She's stronger now," he said without preamble. "The more afraid you are, the closer she gets. That's how she feeds. Through fear. Through belief." Emily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "So what do we do?" Jordan pulled out a page torn from the priest's journal. "This is the rest of the ritual. I found it hidden behind the altar stone. It says we need 3 things: ashes from the church, the blood of the summoner." He hesitated. "That's you." Emily barely reacted. "What's the third?" Jordan's voice dropped to a whisper. "A fire. A real one. In the place where she was burned." Emily's heart pounded. "We have to lure her back?" He nodded. "And finish what they started. Not with hate, but with truth. She's twisted now, but she was once human. Maybe that's the only way to end it." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them. The branches overhead groaned. Then, out of the shadows behind the trees, a voice, clear, melodic, and horrifying, whispered, "Truth won't save you now." From the darkness, a pale hand reached out inches from Emily's shoulder. She didn't scream. Not this time. Instead, she turned to face it. Because now she had a plan. Emily and Jordan didn't waste time. By sunrise, they had gathered the items they needed: a rusted tin of ash scraped from the charred floor of the ruined church, a pocketknife for the blood ritual, and a bottle of kerosene Jordan found in his father's shed. They were both silent as they packed the supplies into a backpack. The weight of what they were about to do hung between them like a storm. "We only get one shot at this," Jordan said, tightening the straps. "We bring her to the church. You draw her out. I start the fire. Then we say the ritual together. And if it doesn't work?" Emily asked. Jordan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sky was gray by the time they returned to the ruins. The wind had picked up, swirling dead leaves around them. Emily took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the old church. She could still feel the heat from the flames that had burned here over a century ago, even though only ash remained. Jordan cleared away a space near the altar and poured a circle of salt. In the center, he set the jar of ash. They lit a few candles, just enough for light, and then they waited. Silence stretched out around them. Then the air shifted. A sound like breath blown through hollow wood echoed through the ruins. The temperature dropped, and the shadows thickened. Emily stood inside the circle, hands trembling. She took the pocket knife and made a shallow cut on her palm. A few drops of blood dripped onto the ash, hissing like water on a hot stove. "I call you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I said your name. I accept your curse. Now face me. The air exploded with a screech like metal tearing. And then she appeared. Lorana, not in the flesh, but as a shuddering silhouette of smoke and flame, her face flickering between beauty and horror. Her long black hair moved like it was underwater, and her eyes, black pits, locked onto Emily with a hatred so deep it felt ancient. You called me, Lorana said, voice like coals breaking apart. You will burn like they burned me. Jordan stepped forward, holding up the priest's torn page. This ends now. You don't belong here. Lorana's form flickered. Her smile curled unnaturally. You dare use the words of a murderer? She stepped toward the circle but hesitated. The salt and ash sizzled as she neared. Emily stood her ground. They feared you because they didn't understand you. I'm not them, but I'm not afraid anymore. Lorana screamed, an unholy, piercing cry that cracked the nearby stones. The candles blew out instantly. Darkness swallowed the ruins. Jordan fumbled for the lighter. Now Emily. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out the last piece, her grandmother's rosary. Not part of the original ritual, but something that had always protected her as a child. She threw it into the center of the circle, then recited the final lines of the ritual, her voice shaking but growing louder. From ash to earth, from flame to bone, I bind the curse to the place unknown. Blood to dust, breath to flame, I silence now the cursed name. Jordan struck the lighter and threw it onto the ash. The kerosene ignited in an instant, flames rising high, swirling in a vortex around Lorana's form. She screamed again, but this time it was different. Less rage, more pain. Her body convulsed, writhing against the fire. The shadows tried to pull her back, but the salt held firm. Don't stop, Jordan yelled. Keep going. Emily shouted the final line again, louder, over the roar of the fire. Lorana's form began to crack, splintering like glass under pressure. Flames poured through her chest, her face, until, finally, she let out one final cry. You cannot erase me. And with a burst of wind and flame, she vanished. The fire shrank back into embers. Silence fell. The ruins were just ruins again. Emily dropped to her knees, shaking and gasping. Jordan rushed to her side. You did it. I think it worked. She looked around. The ash was still smoldering. The wind had returned. The air no longer felt suffocating. For the first time in days, Emily felt light. But deep down, she knew it wasn't over yet, because the name still lived in her memory. And names are never truly forgotten. The morning after the ritual, Windale felt lighter. The clouds had finally cleared, and sunlight broke through for the first time in weeks. Birds sang again, as if the forest itself had exhaled. People returned to the streets, unaware of the darkness that had nearly claimed their town. Emily sat on the front steps of her house, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the sun rise. She hadn't slept, but it wasn't fear that kept her awake this time. It was the weight of everything she had experienced. Every shadow, every whisper, every scream. She kept replaying Lorana's final words in her mind. You cannot erase me. The fire at the ruins had burned itself out by the time she and Jordan left, but the ash remained, thick, cold, and still faintly pulsing. They had buried the torn pages of the priest's journal under a cairn of stones, just in case. Jordan called it a precaution. Emily called it hope. Her phone buzzed. It was Jordan. You good? She smiled faintly and typed back, still here. Still sane. Mostly. He replied with a laughing emoji and a flame. Typical Jordan. Emily stood and went inside, where her parents were finally back to normal, chatting over breakfast like nothing strange had ever happened. They had no memory of being gone, no awareness that time had even skipped. It was as if the whole town had been under a spell that lifted the moment the ritual ended. But not for her. And not for Jordan. She went to school that day, expecting at least some trace of what had happened to be left behind. But everything looked normal. Teachers lectured. Students scrolled their phones. Hallways buzzed with gossip about exams and crushes, not cursed witches or haunted mirrors. Emily and Jordan met in the library again during lunch. Anything, she asked. Jordan shook his head. I checked the mirror in the gym locker room. Nothing. No whispers. No shadows. Just me and my bad haircut. Emily cracked a smile. So it's really over? He paused. As over as it can be. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Emily said, "What if someone says her name again? Accidentally? On the internet?" Jordan gave her a grim look. "Then it'll start again. Just like it always has." That night, Emily sat in her room, staring at her laptop screen. She opened a blank document, typed the name, Lorana. Her fingers hovered over the delete key. Then she hesitated. What if knowing was worse than forgetting? What if remembering her story, her pain, her curse, was the only way to keep it from repeating? Instead of deleting the name, she wrote more. She began documenting everything, what she saw, what she felt, what the ritual required. She added a warning at the top of the page. This name is not just a name. Do not speak it. Do not share it. But if you ever hear it, know what it means. She saved the file to a USB drive and hid it inside a hollowed-out book on her shelf. Then she finally allowed herself to sleep. But the dreams didn't come. Not anymore. For now, Emily was free. But deep underground, beneath the ruins of the old church, something stirred. A charred stone cracked open slightly. And through it, the faintest sound emerged. A whisper. Barely audible. But real. "Say it again." Months passed. Spring arrived in Windale, and with it, a sense of peace that no one questioned. The darkness that had quietly wrapped itself around the town had faded like a fog retreating from the morning sun. Flowers bloomed where nothing had grown before. The townspeople smiled more. The heaviness was gone. But for Emily and Jordan, the memory hadn't faded. They met often, not out of fear, but out of a quiet, unspoken pact. The kind of bond you only form when you've faced death or something worse together. They didn't talk much about the ritual anymore. They didn't need to. Sometimes silence holds more truth than words. One afternoon, while reorganizing her room, Emily found the USB drive again, tucked neatly inside the hollowed-out book. She hesitated before opening it. But curiosity eventually won. The file she had written was still there. The Lorana account. She skimmed through the document, her words raw and honest. The way she had described Lorana, not just as a monster, but as a woman transformed by pain, consumed by rage, and then twisted into something unrecognizable. The file ended with a warning: if you are reading this, be cautious. Names have power. Some names should remain forgotten. If you say it, you must be prepared to face what follows. Emily sat there for a while, then opened a new file. She titled it, "The Truth Behind the Name." And she began writing again. This time, she told the story from the beginning, not as a warning, but as a record. Something that might help someone else one day if history repeated itself. Because history always does. Across town, Jordan was doing the same. He had started a notebook, physical, not digital, filled with sketches of the altar, the salt circle, even Lorana's warped face. Not as a keepsake, but as a blueprint. His grandmother had once told him, the things we fear most are the things we must understand. And understanding, he realized, was the first step in defending against it. But the world outside Windale kept moving unaware. One night, weeks later, something changed. A viral video started circulating online. A group of teenage girls doing a late-night TikTok challenge in another small town. Laughing, daring each other to say something they'd seen on a creepy internet forum. One girl giggled, leaned toward the camera, and said it, "Lorana." The video glitched briefly. The camera flickered. And then the screen went black. The comments section blew up with jokes. "Nice editing, LOL. Where's part 2? That was creepy AF." But one comment stood out, buried halfway down the thread: "You shouldn't have said her name. She listens through the screen." The next day, that comment was gone. Emily never saw the video. But that night, she awoke to a strange sound. A voice, not in her room, not in her head, but from her phone, still locked on her nightstand. It was whispering. A single word. Again. She sat up slowly, staring at the dark screen. It stopped. The house was silent. But the message was clear. Lorana had not been destroyed. Just delayed. Banished. Until the name found its way into the world once more. Emily stood, walked to her window, and stared out at the quiet town below. Everything looked the same. But she knew better now. Some curses don't end. They wait. Wait to be remembered. Wait to be spoken. Wait to be believed in. She whispered to herself, not the name, but a promise. "I'll be ready next time." Because she knew there would be a next time. And someone else would need to know the truth. 35.